Hello and welcome. This is a Public Affairs Forum sponsored by the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. Glad you're with us today. We hold these Public Affairs Forums once a month, inviting in people who can give presentations about items that concern us and that can hopefully propel us to action and social justice. Today we're very happy to have a couple of editors from the Texas Observer. We have Mr. Gus Bova, who is the editor-in-chief, interim editor-in-chief at the Texas Observer, and executive director, Lauren Lynch. And so, those of you who do not know this, that this Public Affairs Forum started in 1954, same year this church was incorporated, and at that point in time, we held our very first Public Affairs Forum. As far as we know, this is the oldest continuously operating Public Affairs Forum in the state of Texas. 1954, that first forum we held, we invited the very young editor of the Texas Observer, Ronnie Duggar, to be our first forum speaker. So today, we're happy to welcome back editors who carry on that great tradition of progressive journalism. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Try to be back next time in fewer than 70 years.
There you go. Well, you have been there. There have been some in the interim. It hasn't been a total lapse of 70 years.
Okay.
So both of your editors at the Texas Observer, can you give a little bit of the history of the Observer?
Okay. Yeah, and just to clarify, I'm the head of the editorial side, and Lauren is basically head of the business.
The other stuff.
Head of the business side. She's the executive director, so she can bring extra insight on our bright financial future and our lack of financial struggles. We won't be having any more, actually, because of the support of folks like you right here in these pews, I hear. But yeah, anywho, the Observer started in 1954. Honestly, some of y'all in this crowd might be able to tell this history better than me. Jim Bryce, I know I've talked to some about the old Observer history. But anywho, yeah, it was founded by a founding editor was a young guy, Ronnie Duggar. It was technically a fusion of a couple pre-existing papers that came together and at least one kind of liberal bankroller behind it. And it was weekly for a while, and then it was bi-weekly. It was kind of did a combination of kind of insidery Texas Capitol stuff aimed at, liberal Texans at a time when there was only one political party in Texas, and so it was sort of for the liberal wing of the Democratic Party in the state that was trying to combat things like segregation or advance the notion that workers might have a right or two in this state. But at the same time, it kind of would publish some of your early, some of the early kind of, I guess, mostly fathers, not to gender it unnecessarily, but of sort of Texas literature and Texana, a lot of those classic authors published with the Observer as well. I don't know if you want me to go to the present, but...
Who were some of those original writers for the Texas Observer? They were published in that.
Well, I'm talking like Dobie and all the big old names, Again, I feel like you could probably step in and help me out here, actually.
Brammer?
That's right, Billy Lee Brammer. There you go. That's right. Do you want to jump in?
No, I think it's such a long and historied organization. It's kind of, I think Gus actually remembers it better than I do, to be honest, because you've been around just a little bit longer than I have. But you've given a great summary, so there you go.
Okay, perfect. We became I don't really know exactly what year you'd say we switched to being kind of more of a magazine and print. That would have been just the last few decades.
We became a nonprofit in 1990.
Yeah, super early.
Pretty early on. Yeah.
We were super early as far as going nonprofit. It's sort of way ahead of the trend on that. And over time, the print product has become more of a somewhat glossy bi-monthly magazine to match the times. People don't necessarily get their day-to-day, week-to-week news in print, so
I do still get complaints from people that remember when it used to be like a really big newspaper and it was sort of like an actual on print, and they're like, you should have never gone glossy.
Before we sold out and went glossy, that's right.
Really just ruined it after that.
There are some folks. Andy, that'll get started at least.
Well, very good. Yes, the Observer has a long history of progressive journalism in the state of Texas. How did the two of you decide to go into this field? After all, there are numerous fields that pay a lot more than journalism. And so how did you two decide to get involved in this?
I started as on the editorial side of the magazine. Not at the Observer, but at a different place. I was a reporter and a fact checker, and I quickly realized that I did not have the patience to be a good reporter. Actually, I always kind of felt bad asking people for personal information for some reason. For some reason, in my head, it felt a lot easier to ask people for money, which doesn't make a ton of sense. But I realized that I loved the field so much that I cared so much about it that I was like, well, I could just go to the other side. And I moved into the business side and I started doing fundraising, and I just stuck. That was pretty much kind of all that's happened. I've been very lucky to be at print publications, old lefty print publications, for a long time. I started my career at The Nation magazine in New York, and I was there for about 7 years, and then I came to the Observer, and I've been at another place as well in between. And I kind of have a weird history where I was with the Observer for 4.5 years, and then I left for about 18 months, and then I just came back as executive director in December? In September, end of September of 2023. Yeah.
How did you decide to go into this?
For the money. I was previously employed at Casa Marianella in Austin, which some of y'all may know. I wasn't a journalist. And actually, the Observer actually pays better than Casa Marianella, believe it or not. There's not many jobs you could say that about at the time, but for me, it was financially a step up. Really, I was hoping for something where I could write and people would actually read what I wrote. So I had been doing like poetry and stuff like that before. I thought I'd go to a more popular medium. So I thought of journalism. I was working at Casa, and an editor at the Observer was like, well, you have no experience, but you work at Casa. That's interesting. Sure, you can be an intern. And I was an intern for 10 months while still working at the shelter. And right when I was about to run entirely out of money and have no plan, they offered me a sort of cub reporter. They called it a reporter researcher role at the Observer. It was about $30K at the time, and I felt rich, briefly. Some of y'all know I come to this church, and that's my baby right there. And so now I wouldn't be able to get by on $30K, but at the time I thankfully was living a very cheap sort of dirtbag Austin lifestyle. And then I just kept around and kept slowly moving up the ranks, I guess. And now here I am, interim editor-in-chief, 8 years later. So.
I say if you just continue sticking around until they pay you better, it's usually the best way to get in through the back door. So.
Just get in, right? Just get in and hold on like a barnacle. Yeah. Is what I. That was my plan.
The Observer probably does pay better than for most poets, and so
that's right.
So you probably made a wise decision.
That's right. That's right.
Part of the motto of the Observer is this. Those of you who subscribe to it, you can see that motto on page 3 as it's printed with every issue. Here is part of what they say in that motto. Quote, "We will hew hard to the truth as we find it and the right as we see it." How does the Observer achieve those goals?
It's one of the coolest things about being a writer or even an editor now at the Observer is that you do just get an incredible amount of freedom in the stories you pick to cover, how you're going to cover them. There are sort of broad guardrails, right? I mean, we practice all the standard ethics of professional journalism in this country, and we also have sort of a broadly progressive lens, but within that, you can pretty much do what you want. And so I've had the opportunity to try my hand at all the different forms of journalism at the Observer, sort of down the middle and investigative reporting, long-form investigations. I've done spicy columns in reaction to things Governor Abbott has done. I've done, sort of essayistic things, book reviews. They've let me do everything. And so, that may make me not the number one candidate for the New York Times, I suppose. But at the Observer, it's been really rewarding for me. And the writers just have a lot of freedom to, report where their consciences lead them. So.
Yeah, I think we also do it through, from my lenses on the business side, it's sort of making sure the guardrails are in place for how we think about advertising, how we think about who we take money from, and sort of having that really clear standard in place of if you make a donation in any level or amount, that's where your influence stops. So you get to come to me and you can make comments. I'm happy to talk about them. The editor's always happy to have a conversation with our supporters, but it is something that, when I've had a few instances throughout my career in fundraising that, I've had donors call me and be like, I don't understand why you're not covering this, and I don't understand why you cover it this way, and I'm gonna, I'd like to talk to someone about this, and you're like, no, I don't think so. I don't think that I can. Right. I'm actually now gonna make it even harder a little bit for you to get to where you need to go, so I'm just gonna put a stop on that right now. Yeah. And I think that is a nice sort of, I'm going to say freedom and, I guess, money limitation that is kind of placed on you that you just kind of accept and move forward with, because that's kind of all you can do, because that's what's right for the journalism, essentially, at the end of the day.
Is there one stream of stories in the recent past that has caused you a lot of trouble or a lot of criticism? What are those avenues that do that for you?
Honestly, the political coverage, just generally speaking, and it kind of can come from both ways, where it is generally, we've had people, we've lost money based on the fact that we covered a Democrat less than perfect, less than like sort of being like, this was an issue we had with a Democrat in office or someone that's running. Oh, yeah. And that was, oh no, how dare you, do this? And it was like, well, we're not really here to back one party. We're here to hew hard to the truth, and that's where the truth was. So that's where we went.
Well, this must have, if it were a democratically elected statewide office, then this must have been some time ago.
I think it was someone running.
Not statewide.
Yeah. It was a local. I think it was just a local, honestly, election, and it was just someone running.
Yeah,
it was a primary, I believe, if I remember correctly.
It comes up in Democratic primaries. That some of our staunch supporters or donors will be committed to one person in a Democratic primary, and because of facts that emerge, we might critically cover that person or draw critical attention to something in their background, and then that will obviously upset someone who's in the middle of a campaign for them. That's pretty easy for us to deal with, but it just comes up. I know that during the time period when Austin was experimenting with rolling back the criminalization of homelessness, the way that I personally covered that was to basically just go to the different encampments all the time and talk to the people living in those encampments and ask them what they thought of the policy and how it had impacted their life directly. And that was my approach, and I was kind of relentless about that for about a year because there was so much, honestly, sometimes it was almost like hatred was being ginned up against the unhoused in Austin. And I was really committed to that beat for a while, and I've heard kind of second, third hand that there were some staunch Observer reporters who didn't like the way I approached that issue, but I think it's all, in the end, it's in the realm of, civil disagreement, and if someone really wants to pull their money, that's your problem.
That's my problem. That's one of my favorite pieces, actually, we've ever published that you wrote about the unhoused, and I think that was sort of I always personally just in how I consume media, and kind of what I will often say if I'm talking to someone who a supporter or someone that I feel I can say this to, is that if you agree with everything that you read in a publication, maybe you should be reading some other stuff too. Mm-hmm.
Well, with your emphasis there on the unhoused population, what is the most important subject that you think you have ever dealt with? Do you think it was that homeless issue, or other articles that have had that impact?
For me it was probably that, and then both before and then after that I was border and immigration for the most part. That was where I had come from with my Casa Marinella background, and even before that I was working at a different nonprofit that worked with recently arrived immigrants back in Kansas, where I'm from. Though I can't say that I can't say that I moved immigration policy in any way, unfortunately, which is actually why I took a break off that beat for a little while, because I felt like I was pouring my blood, sweat, and tears out, and you couldn't even get the courts to strike down obviously contradictory and illegal policies, and let alone get Congress to move on comprehensive immigration reform or the Dreamers or even low-hanging fruit. So I can't claim a big win in that field, but I know I've done good work. So
I'm not obviously covering anything, but I think besides those two topics, which I totally agree with, is also the criminal justice work that we've done, especially around mass incarceration and the sort of horrendous conditions in there. That's been certainly that's always stuck with me personally, and something I've talked a lot about when I go talk to people. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is probably a common concern for many people who try to affect change, and that is when you write an article and address an issue, and you see nothing, no substantive change coming from that. What keeps you going? That you just don't say to hell with it. What keeps you going?
I mean, the little messages and emails and stuff from readers actually do a lot. Maybe not for someone who, I don't know, maybe if you're at the New York Times and you get so much feedback, it starts to drown out. But for us, I think everyone at the Observer gets a lot of encouragement from actually direct messages from readers, honestly. And then, I don't know, in the end, a lot of times it is maybe not thought of as I don't know if people think of it as a creative line of work or not, but it is basically creative labor you're doing. And in the end, you've got to, somewhere within yourself, you got to know you did a good job and just have that little, spot within you that can't be budged. But it would be nice if one day Texas law and policy were more amenable to shame.
I think that's the dream, yeah. I think it's been, for me, it's sort of been this space where I agree with the notes when you hear little things from people or readers or a story that stuck with them. I have stories that you've written or other people have written that have stuck with me, still stick with me to this day, that made me think differently about someone, and that always kind of about something, an issue. And I think at the end of the day, y'all are telling stories that they're impacting someone. If it's the person that told their story, that gave up their time and their personal emotional and physical labor to tell you and open up about that, it's like that made a difference for somebody's life and how they lived and how they interact with people. And I think that for me is one of those pieces I just hold on to because it made a difference in somebody's life, and that alone is enough for me. I do also wish that maybe some shame would kick in, but
Yeah. Well, it seems, from my perspective, it seems like most people's attention span over the last years has shortened. Some say this started with MTV and 3-minute videos, and now I think people's attention spans down to 30 seconds. And so, how do you get people to pay attention to some of your in-depth, longer stories instead of just a 20-second tweet and something like that?
You want to take the first?
Sure. I think, we're always kind of trying to think about how, I'm sorry, Gino's smiling, it's very cute. It distracted me for a second there. I think trying to figure out different ways to get people to interact, even if it's just for a minute. And I think because slowly but surely it sort of draws people in. You give them 3 highlights because not everybody can spend, 7 minutes on reading a 4,000-word article. But I think if you're getting the information across and you're able to draw people in, they're going to slowly start to pick up pieces of whatever the story is and be drawn in by it, because the reporting itself is good and you want to understand it and you want to read more about it. And you have to kind of play the field on all sides is what I'm going to call it. You kind of have to do the little, the snippets and the tweets and the short little tidbits to kind of get someone's attention, because even if it's just for a minute, you've still gotten at least some information that is accurate and it's important for them to know about it, and that even if it's reaching their ear for a minute, that's kind of what counts. And I do think at the same time our sort of data, like the Google Analytics kind of stuff, says that the average sort of read time on our pieces when people come and read them is 3 to 5 minutes or something like that. It's pretty high for the industry.
And usually high.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our audience is not, I guess, not enormous compared to some other publications, but the depth of the engagement is very high. People tend to stay on our articles longer. And of course, thanks to the internet, you can always get something to take off and truly go viral around the world, which is nice. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, some of it's traditional news writing techniques, right? Like the headline should embody the story in case someone only reads the headline. And especially for a news story, the first few paragraphs should basically give them the story in case they stop reading. Some of that's just traditional techniques, nothing new. But I do also believe with the long form features that you've got to really commit to the tools of creative nonfiction writing, be generous to the reader, give them pleasure and emotional reaction to the reading, because you are competing with so many other things for their attention, so.
Including kitten videos,
That's right.
You have to compete against...
Right. Which can be embedded in an article randomly throughout the page just to keep them going.
With the repetition, and my perspective, this goes back to George W. Bush with his mantra, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, repeating that over and over and over again. And now that was a lie, but a large percentage of Americans still believe that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Do you ever intentionally combat those articles that you know to be untrue? And so in that way, do you intentionally try to, argue against some of those things that we classify as fake news?
That's interesting. I feel like we did a little more explicit debunking style articles during the Trump years, and I don't think we've done as much lately. There's always this debate in the newsroom about are we correcting the record, or are we amplifying the misinformation? Are we too late? Is the misinformation already out there and we can't counter it? Or do we have the right audience? Are we talking to a completely different audience than is the audience receiving the original misinformation? There's always an internal debate, but honestly, you bring it up and you make me think that we should go back to doing it a little more.
No, I think I think that just giving misinformation air is always sort of an iffy thing that we try. This is out of my league, but out of my space. But I think when I'm talking to people, I think you make a really good point about the audience, and we're not. Is it helpful to debunk something that everyone we're already talking to knew immediately when they read it that that's not true, or they had an instinct about it or something? So I think giving it air is sometimes not the best approach, but I do think I agree. Maybe you should think about,
or especially if it's something misleading coming from a Democrat. That's probably where we would be the strongest match of what we can do in our audience, because obviously it's not entirely exclusive to one party, political misinformation sometimes.
Well, as more and more people go for their news, as they go to online sources, what do you see as the future of print journalism, which as opposed to something you post on the internet? Obviously, you vet your stories. You try to get to the truth. You try not to misinterpret or to provide misinformation. So how do you compete with those online news sources, which more and more publications and sources are using these days?
It's a great question, Luther. If you figure out an answer exactly to that, you let me know. I think it is.
Be a business consultant.
There you go. I think that it is a constant question we have to be asking ourselves in this industry, because our industry is sort of in crisis right now for a lot of different reasons, and the sort of internet and how it works and how we interact with it is certainly one of them. And I think, it all sort of has its moments in which you just try to think about how can we use this to our advantage as a partner piece with print. I think that I am a solid millennial aged person, and I love print, and I have a lot of friends that love print, and I have seen a lot of the Gen Z era kind of also being like, I would like to read a magazine, or I would like to do this, and it's just in such small pockets, it's getting harder and harder to reach. And what is the sort of cost benefit analysis, to doing it, I guess, for such small little pockets. But I think as long as we're able to continue doing it, which I have no intention of changing or seeing change, and it's certainly been a conversation that has come up in the last couple, I don't know, as long as I've been around the Observer, it's been a question of what if one day we need to just go, get rid of print and go just to digital? And I was always a pretty staunch, no, I really like holding the magazine. I like looking at it, I like getting it, I like looking at the pictures, I like looking at the art, I like reading the words on a piece of paper when I'm walking around somewhere, or, well, not as I'm walking, but but going somewhere and reading it like I read anything else.
I feel like there are a lot of us.
I think you're right, yeah.
There are things you just cannot, like reading a story to a child. Read a story on your phone. Okay.
We'll have a period for questions in a few minutes, and so if you have to save those comments for then, okay? Very good. That's all right.
But she's just agreeing the continuing value of print media. And I'm not in the realm of exactly crunching the numbers on how much it costs versus how many of our subscribers are subscribing because we have it. So I just have to go off my instinct, which is that people donate to NPR and become members of NPR in exchange for a mug or a tote bag. And so as far as a perk goes, a high quality magazine every 2 months, I think is a much better perk of membership. In addition, for people who are still inclined to actually read in print, it's a completely legitimate, well-made, well-done way to get to read the Texas Observer. For some people, though, it's sort of a perk that they like to look at and show off to their friends, maybe, and that's fine for me.
I mean, I will also say that the print publication and the people that subscribe or members that receive the magazine is something like, I want to say, close to triples the cost of that it takes to make the magazine. So the people that pay for it are coming in with way more money than it costs to actually do it. So as long as that continues to be the case, which I don't see changing, we won't be changing that approach at all.
Well, as you indicate, the Texas Observer and other publications, we read about this all the time with newspapers consolidating, and especially small newspapers closing down and going out of business. In the face of these pressures, what does the future of the Texas Observer look like?
Well, I think it sounds like from I guess y'all knowing Gus and just sort of generally being in this space that of course the Observer's had a couple just a couple financial issues in the last couple of years that we've combated, and decades. It's actually decades, our entire existence. But that's also, I guess, the story of a small nonprofit is also just kind of that. But I think, as I mentioned, the industry is in crisis, and we have to figure out how to fund journalism in a sustainable way. And I don't know that anyone has the answer of exactly what that looks like yet. I think nonprofits was the answer for a while, to move away from the advertising, that has sort of declined so consistently over the last couple decades. But I think we moved into nonprofit. I mean, as an industry, we moved into the nonprofit space, but we didn't change how anything was run. Nothing changed about it, really. It's still run the same way a for-profit newspaper was run in many ways. There's a few small differences, but it is very similar in a lot of ways. And I don't know if that's going to continue to be sustainable. I think that we're going to have to be thinking outside the box in the same way that people thought outside the box to move to nonprofits in the first place. But I think it's sort of the one area of, I guess I would call innovation, which is something that, you often get asked when you're in the industry from a funder or something. You're like, what are you guys innovating? And I'm like, we're not innovating anything. Journalism is journalism. It's been journalism for hundreds of years. It's not going to change. But can we think about how to make this sustainable and how to ensure that we continue providing this reporting and this work that's so valuable to the state and to, the country? How do we keep doing that? And we have to have the support of people like our readers and the communities around us that we're helping inform and keep informed that this is a value that we have to keep alive. And how do we continue doing that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everyone here is aware of the complete free fall of truly local news in this country. We are a statewide publication. We can't substitute for all of the local papers around the state at all, and we don't try. You know, there should be a staff as large as the Texas Observer reporting in every town across the state to truly cover local news, right? And I think everyone here knows what happened there. You know, there was a period where we had the print newspaper, and if you wanted to sell or buy anything in your city, you took out an ad in that print newspaper. And subscribers barely had to pay anything for the newspaper because really the publisher was selling you, the audience, to the advertisers. And the subscriber just got a great deal and got to read about original reporting from war reporters sent by their Dallas newspaper to the Middle East alongside their high school football coverage, you know? And it was all wildly profitable, and the internet killed it. and we as an industry screwed up, and we let all of our journalism go on the internet for free at first, not understanding that people would get used to getting it for free, and it'd be hard to get them to come back and start paying again. And unfortunately, we don't have the answer to that. We are more of a niche publication, but niche publications are one of the things that can survive right now. You basically, like, the goal of I think, I'm getting a little into business strategy here, but like, to me, messaging, like, the goal of a place like The Observer is like to be your favorite print publication. You know what I mean? Like, it's not giving you all of your news, but it's the one you like the most. It's the one you identify with the most. And I think we have a chance to be that for sort of progressive-minded Texans all over the state. We just have to reach a lot of people who just haven't been reached by the same type of messaging that NPR hammers you with over the radio in their membership drives however many times a year, right? Where every time you turn on the radio, you're just blasted with guilt for not paying for this radio. Maybe we won't do it to that extent, but anywho, we got to get people, the type of person who becomes a member of NPR, get that person to also pick one or two more media outlets, one or two more journalism outlets that they want to support for, again, we're talking $5 a month. We're talking about the same type of commitment as an NPR. To get the magazine, is it $5 or is it $6? $5 a month. It's a great deal. Right here, here's the barcode. But
I think it's also, I mean, we're never going to go the paywall route because I think, to your point, like, when it was a cost-benefit thing, you know, with newspapers where it was like you were getting a deal as a reader to get all of this news for, you know, $1 a week, or I don't actually know how much it was. But that obviously was shifted, and now because the internet, people are used to getting it for free. They should get it for free. It should be so accessible for everyone to get news of any kind, and that is in my mind, such an important part of what we're doing, I think. But it's finding a way to say that this is now not about everyone getting their community news. It's about everyone getting their community news, even the people that can't afford to pay for it, and how we spread that cost around by more of us paying where we can is kind of how I like to think about it.
Yeah. Well, with that in mind, I assume there might be a journalism conference once a year or something that you'd go to and talk to people about these kinds of things, other editors and printers.
Like to figure out solutions?
Yeah. What weird idea, are there any strange ideas that are being talked about for the future?
I mean, I think I've heard a few different versions. I honestly think that in a lot of ways people are still stuck because, I mean, we're sort of still in the, I guess when you think about, I'm going to use the wrong term, it's like the opposite of a bell curve. Is that a bell curve? So it's this one.
The U.
It's the U curve. That can't be what it's called. I feel like we're kind of like still in the edge of it. I think it's starting to plateau, but I don't know if we're quite on the upswing yet as an industry in figuring out what's next. I think there's a lot of discussion around it. I think there's a lot of people trying to figure out what the solutions look like. There's this sort of, there's a big collective of, for example, of funders out of Chicago, like people like MacArthur Foundation and a lot of different places that have formed this thing called Press Forward, which is this idea about funding, how do we fund local news? But it's sort of like, okay, but what about everyone that doesn't fall within hyper-local news? And how long are you going to be around for that local news place? What happens when you leave and you stop funding them? Like, what do they do then? And sort of where that inconsistencies of that lie and finding that right balance of for a nonprofit anyway, like grant funding and membership and major donors and events. And there's a million different ways you can think about it. And I don't know that anyone's found the perfect division of the pie to figure out what it looks like. I think that I've heard some folks talking about making co-ops and talking about how that could look for media. And I don't know if anyone's done it successfully yet, but that's one version I've sort of heard of. Again, I think I don't know what innovation looks like for our industry at that level yet, and I think that we have to figure it out. Otherwise, we are in trouble. So.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, if you're not a subscriber, then I would encourage you to subscribe to the Texas Observer and give them your support. And maybe in the future you'll get a free mug. I'm not sure.
Right.
So,
Maybe we can work on that.
and so, any of you that would have questions of them, let me get the mic and I'll come around. You can ask the questions. And I think you earned it. The honor of asking or commenting.
Oh, I just agree that I think so. Maybe I'm just not very loud.
You can be a little closer. You
Okay.
can be really careful.
I have some help here. Yes, Gina wants to
That's
help.
my mother-in-law, by the way, asking the
Who's
question.
not a public speaker. I just agree. There are certain things that you can't accomplish without having a vibrant media presence in your life, like reading to a child, or we use the library. I love magazines. I'm very sad. Magazines were a part of my childhood. I used to cut paper dolls out of my mom's magazines, So I see a need for this to continue, and I'm glad that y'all are promoting that.
Thank you, Mr. Sam.
Hi. I was wondering, are you going to be able to use AI to fact check or enhance readability?
I'm gonna let you take that one.
Gosh, I guess I am right at this point. I'm still stuck in just sort of hesitation and fear regarding AI. Obviously, there's always going to be some bright, I hope, some bright red lines in journalism regarding AI. Even the quote-unquote simplest form of journalism, going to a city council meeting and doing a little write-up on it, we still want a human being trained in journalistic ethics, who understands context, doing that work. I don't believe we want AI taking the transcript from that and trying to automatically produce an article. But to your question, there may be a role to help reduce some expenses on checking for grammar, checking for repetition of words in a text. I don't know if you could use it for fact checking or not, but I'm dubious.
I was after something like, this is the truth, this is somewhat right. This guy's just BS, kind of.
All right, I'm gonna. I may be advocating rather than just describing here, but I'm gonna say no.
As a former fact checker early in my career, I'm gonna say no.
But it is. There will be this temptation because all of that's expensive. The hourly cost for a competent fact checker is fairly high. Same for a copy editor and all the other roles in the process that you don't think about as much as you do the reporter. So.
Well, sometimes it.
What's that? And the AI editing it?
Who's teaching the AI?
Yeah, right.
And I would say sometimes the truth is hard to come by. For instance, when I worked for the state of Texas, I had a lawyer that reported to me. And so one time I gave him a document and said, okay, tell me what this says. Tell me what our position should be. And he came back and said, well, what do you want me to say? So he was willing to argue either side. And so whatever my preconceived notion was. And so sometimes the truth might be a little hard to arrive at.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm interested to hear the Observer's philosophy on the timing and release of certain articles. Like, are you progressive in saying we got to get this information to our readers? Or is there more strategy saying, hey, this might create some infighting, like during political times, we don't want to like hurt or help a candidate, so let's plan to release this? Or like, I'm just wondering, is it, progressive, or is it like there's more strategy because we want to, not hurt or help any candidates if we're releasing political articles?
Yeah, for us, well, and honestly, there's somewhat of an internal debate about whether we use progressive as the term to describe us, partially because there's the possibility for different interpretations. It's kind of an open-ended term. So it used to be kind of right at the top, Texas Observer would say like your liberal weekly paper, and it's kind of, we've mostly removed that from most of the public messaging because there can be misinterpretation. We're not trying to help a specific Democratic candidate win or help a specific nonprofit achieve their organizational goals or get money. It's a broader progressive point of view, like an approach to issues where if you look at criminal justice, you're looking at how it impacts poor Texans, non-white Texans, women, LGBT Texans. That's your general approach to each issue you look at. You look at where power is and who's being hurt by it, and you focus there, and you put more weight and more light on those people's voices and let them speak for themselves more than they can sometimes in what you might call mainstream media, though I think that's another term that gets kind of misused all the time. Yeah, I don't know. It's more broad principles, and as far as timing, if it's newsworthy, if it's good, if it's important, then we'll run a story that the Beto O'Rourke campaign would hate 3 weeks before the primary, because that's kind of what makes us ethical journalists, basically.
Hi. Back on the subject of fact-checking and all, and the internal debate about that, and I might suggest to you that I would bet that a large percentage of your readership is pretty active on social media themselves, and as such, they probably have friends, acquaintances, relatives who are posting up stuff that their first take is to look at that and say, no, that can't be true. But to debunk that themselves does take some amount of effort where they have to go out and do legwork and try to figure that all out. So to a certain extent, you all having basically done some of that legwork for them, both would help them reduce the amount of time that they have to go spend trying to figure things out themselves, and be able to respond in real time to something somebody posted and say, yeah, no, that's not true. Here is some evidence against it, and B, actually give some resonance to you, because by them perhaps attaching links to your articles and all, showing that debunking, that gets your messaging both as here's the right message, and also, hey, by the way, we're Texas Observer, and we do a good job at this.
Yeah, that's appreciated. Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I'm very concerned about environment. I was a former subscriber and haven't subscribed. I just did on my phone, so hopefully that will work. Texas is the #1 state in the nation being affected by climate. It's not only sea level rise, but the poisoning of the air. We have cancer alleys everywhere, and wondered, do you have a section or do you have a focus on environment? Many of the papers I subscribe to, they have a little section. We're #1 in wind and solar, but it gets almost no publication whatsoever. So what is your environmental focus?
Do you want me to? Yeah, I mean, it's one of our core beats. It's actually, you'll see it's one of the highlighted, well, it's a category or highlighted beats on our homepage. I'll tell you, it's right now at this moment, it's slightly less active than it has been because we don't have a full-time staff writer on it right now. There's a few beats we don't have full-time staff writers on right now because we've come out and survived some tough budgetary moments in the last couple years, but it is a priority for our freelance money. Environment is one of our high priorities, and we also have been actively partnering with Inside Climate News, basically co-publishing, honestly, most of their Texas stories at this point. So yes, I would say it shifts with the personnel, but in general, border immigration, environment, criminal justice, public health / reproductive health care, of course, politics. We cover labor more than most places, most places in Texas, which isn't saying much. You could do probably a story a month and claim that, but we do cover that more than most people. But anywho, yes, the fate of the planet we depend on is definitely high on our list.
The cover of the next issue is an environmental piece, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is about focused on near Brownsville, where there's a large LNG development that's been fought over for years now, and it's also kind of a profile of some indigenous activism down there as well. So that'll be the next cover. If your subscription went through, it'll be in your mailbox, and if it's not, you call Lauren.
Hi, thank you so much for a great presentation, and we really want to support this kind of independent journalism. I know Ben Sargent had such an incredible following, and do you have any current or potential political cartoonists that I think could enhance your appeal? And then just quickly, secondly, how much sort of lively debate do you get with people writing letters to the editor? Would that be something where you could have people following those letters and your responses?
Well, so you may know this already, but Ben is in every issue. He still files a monthly cartoon for us, so one goes online and one goes in print and online. They're all just incredibly timely, excellent political cartoons. We just have one of the best working political cartoonists left in the game. And actually, one of the features in this issue, the current issue, is about the decline of political cartooning, and also kind of talking about us keeping it somewhat alive, at least. We don't have any other cartoonists, just Ben. But he's great, and we're really lucky to have him. We used to have a kind of like dialogue section at the beginning of the paper that would cull the most interesting reader comments. That was stopped back when I was a writer and had no control over the decision-making process, but maybe we should bring it back.
Well, now you're the decider.
That's right. I can put it in the next issue if I want. Well, actually, that would cost one page, so I'd have to, as long as Lauren's okay with it.
Jim?
Yeah, the important part is I'm going to re-up my subscription for sure. And that goes back to when I actually took two journals that I thought were vitally important to understand what is going on in the Texas Observer and I.S. Stone's Weekly. And that made a difference and shaped my life. And that was back in the days of Ronnie and other people who were there. Lots of questions, but one area that I'm kind of interested in perspective, and that is, I believe that Texas is, in large measure, forming the modern world. It's not a minor player in it. Most people don't realize it. As a result, your activity is much more than a lot of people realize. It's not local or regional. It's worldwide, because Texas has defined things like money and oil throughout the world, which is the same thing, at least for a century or so. At any rate, right now I'm interested in the contrast based on your understanding of the history between what we see in the way Texas operates now, which is with clear distinctions between the Republican and Democratic Party, and the way it was operating when the Observer was founded, when the Democratic Party had the liberal and the conservative wing, the Shivers and the Ralph Yarber wing. Can you help us understand that?
So the question is basically how we. Can you restate the last part, the question part?
How do you think things were then, and the Observer's coverage and influence then? How are things now, and the Observer's coverage and influence now in a different reality?
Yeah, I mean, we would be more. I think we would probably be more influential in terms of shifting policy and laws if the Democratic Party had more power in Texas. The Republicans, they can't completely ignore us when we uncover bulletproof factual information that creates a scandal for them. But in general, if we're just talking about how the environment's being poisoned, or women are being disempowered, or non-white Texans are being disenfranchised, that's to some extent their policy goal. So drawing attention to it is not shifting them, right? And so there's a temptation, I think. There is a temptation to kind of fall into being more defensive of Democrats, I guess, since they're not in power. But we resist that because basically you've got to continue to be consistently apply basically the same journalistic principles no matter what the landscape is, and maybe eventually the landscape will shift. But yeah, I would say one thing we have done, you brought to mind for me, is we have, I would say, put an emphasis on right-wing extremism, obviously, as you talk about a polarization of the parties, and it's basically in the Republican Party where you have power, and therefore you have two wings fighting for power, and in one of those wings, basically direct connections to literal neo-Nazis are emerging, and we have been actually, I would say, increasing focus on that recently through how we spend some of our freelance money. And we have one particular regular freelance correspondent who focuses on that. But it's a different social scene, and it's a different time. I think the original Observer was really, it was a journal for a defined social scene and political movement within the Democratic Party. It had this ready built-in base that with a specific goal. And I think now we're trying to be more statewide, and we're more focused on general principles, but there's less of a definite Austin club around it. Does that make sense? It's kind of a vague answer, but the best I could do. Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but no.
Well, in conclusion, then I would ask you, with both of you being new to your positions, then what are we to expect in the near future from you and from the Texas Observer?
Well, we recently put this young gentleman into the role of heading the editorial side. So I think looking at what that means for us in the next 6 to 12 months is certainly a part of what we're kind of looking at and thinking about. I think it's honestly we're kind of still looking at defining how our organization works. What is that innovation for us? What is the next step for the Observer that helps move us more toward this long-term sustainability, which I think we're seeing, and we're seeing good reactions from our longtime supporters that want, that we've seen even come back into the fold after kind of the tribulations, let's call them, of the last few years. We've seen people come back and want to be involved with us again, and I think that's a huge deal for us, and that it means a lot that everyone still supports us in our community. So great. And I think that defining what that looks like for us, defining how our roles work together, how we, Gus and I have been lucky to work together for a pretty good chunk of time throughout our time at the Observer. You've been there a little bit longer than I was, and then I left for a minute, then I came back. But I think it's interesting to see what this will mean for the Observer because, well, it's still really new. But I think at the same time, it's also it's really fascinating because I think, as you put it very well the other day in an email chain, you and I have learned how to argue productively. And so when we don't always agree about something, or we have a good push and pull to discuss what it looks like. So I guess my message would be, stick around to see what happens next.
Yeah. I mean, in the short term, I wouldn't promise any type of radical transformation, because the core things we do are sort of investigative reporting and news analysis and some cultural coverage. We're basically, it's magazine journalism. It's sort of tried and true. We can always do it better, but I would expect to see us kind of stay steady for a bit, and hopefully both in terms of our journalistic output and our finances, hopefully. And I mean, my thing is, as long as I'm in this, however long I'm in this role, I just think there's a lot of people in Texas who just need to be introduced or reintroduced to the Observer, because they either used to be a big fan and kind of fell off and forgot about it, or they're younger and they don't know that there's this basically unique in the country. I mean, maybe you could say we're a little bit like a Mother Jones, but that's a nationwide magazine. There's no other state that but there's no other state that has a Texas Observer. There really isn't an equivalent. It's a unique, special thing that could have died so many times. And every time somebody saved it, whether it was a journalist who chose to stick around, or it was a patron who came through yet again to bail us out from the brink, and it could have died so many times, and it hasn't, because someone always just cared too much about it.
Or a lot of someone's cared too much about it. Like when we recently had to crowdfund $350,000 in 2 weeks, which we didn't know was possible. But yeah, we're, there have been layoffs all across the industry. And as far as I know, we're the only place where the workers of the Texas Observer said, no, we don't accept the layoffs. We don't accept the publication being shuttered. We're going to save it. And we did it, and we got not just national media attention, but international media attention, a storm for weeks. We blew past our fundraising goals, and our subscriptions took a historic jump. Really, our subscriptions took a historic jump like I've never seen in my time there. And so there were just people all over who just needed to, again, either be introduced for the first time or just be reminded. And that's kind of my mission, in addition to just minor ways that I think we can always write sharper or be at the forefront of the most important pressing issues. But yeah, that's all.
Well, Lauren, Gus, thank you so very much for being with us today. Thank you for heroic and meaningful service, and may you continue to be richly rewarded. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us.